Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, this week we are going to learn how to solve for the area of a trapezoid. And in case you don't know what a trapezoid is, it's this shape right here that we're looking at on our screen. It's not a rectangle. It looks like it's a rectangle with two triangles on the side, or sometimes it's just one triangle on the side. It's not even both triangles. So this means that the formula is a little trickier to solve, but we're still able to solve it. If we look at our formula chart and we look specifically for area and we're looking at our trapezoid, we'll see that the formula says area equals 1/2 base 1 plus base 2 times height. So we need to first figure out which parts are what. So if we are looking at our trapezoid, this right here at the top and this right here at the bottom, which are our straight lines, those are going to be our bases. So that's this piece right here. And then the line that connects one of the bases to the other base, that's going to be our height, which is that last piece over there. So whenever we are looking at the formula, we're going to make sure that we're filling in those labels correctly. So let's go ahead and move on to our first example. Looking at example 1, what we always want you to do is first figure out and label your sides. So if I have my formula, I have 1/2, and then the very first thing that I need to look for are my bases. Remember, your bases are your straight lines. So there's base 1 and base 2. And so now I'm going to go ahead and continue and fill out my formula. So I have base 1, which we can say is 2, and we're going to add that with base 2, which we're going to say is 6. And then the next thing that we need to label is our height, which is the one that connects that. Now let me delete that really fast because I didn't mean to block the number. And that way we can figure out that our height is right here, which is 4. So now that we have filled in, we've identified our sides and we're filling in our formula, we need to start solving it. So the first thing we need to solve is what's inside our parentheses, which is adding our two bases. So 2 plus 6. What is 2 plus 6? Correct. 2 plus 6 is 8. And I'm going to keep everything else from my formula the exact same way. Alrighty, and then the next thing is to multiply. We can multiply 1/2 times 8, or we can do 8 times 4. It doesn't matter which one comes first because at the end, we're multiplying all of them. Now, if you don't like fractions, we can change that 1/2 to a decimal. Do you remember what 1/2 as a decimal is? If you said 0.5, you are absolutely correct. So really what we're doing is we're cutting this number in half. We're multiplying it times 0.5. So let's go ahead and do that. If I multiply 0.5 times 8, what does that give us? If you got 4, you're absolutely correct. Half of 8 is 4, and that's how we know that that's the correct answer. We still have to multiply that times the height, and then that's going to give us our final answer. So our final answer, 4 times 4 is 16 inches. Now this was area, so that means we found the space that's inside our trapezoid. So we need to make sure that with area, we always put squared. So our final answer for the area of a trapezoid is 16 inches squared. Let's go ahead and do our next example. Just like our first example, the very first thing that we need to do is identify our different parts of the formula. So which numbers represent the base 1 and base 2? If you said this 3 and 8 are your base 1 and base 2, you are absolutely correct. So let's go ahead and start filling in that formula. We have 1/2. Base 1 is 3 plus base 2 is 8. And then which one was our height then? Correct, that number that connects your two bases, which is 2. So let's go ahead and start solving. What would we need to solve first? If you said adding 3 plus 8, you are correct. 8 plus 3 is 11. And then we can fill in the rest of our formula. So let's bring down that 1/2. And let's bring down that 2. And now we can go ahead and start. Again, if you don't like the fraction 1/2, change it to the decimal, which is 0.5. So what is half of 11? Yes, I know this one gives us a decimal, and that's okay. You should have gotten 5 1/2, 5.5. And we still have one more step, and that last step is to multiply that by 2. What is 5.5 or 5.5 times 2? If you got 11, you are completely correct. Remember that we need to make sure we label our numbers, and this was inches squared because it's area. So that's what our area for this trapezoid is. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so here is the first one I want you to try on your own. I've given you the formula at the top and use the same steps that we were using for the other two problems. When you're finished solving, go ahead and enter your answer. So now let's see if you were correct. The very first thing that we need to do is identify our sides for our formula. So remember, my base 1 and base 2, those are going to be the numbers that are straight across. And so that means that for my formula, I have 1/2. My two bases were 1 and 6, which means that my height is the one connecting those, which is 5. The very first thing you should have done is added 6 plus 1, which is 7. And then we can continue with cutting that in half for the rest of your formula. So 1/2 of 7 should have given you 3.5 or 3.5 if you prefer decimals. And then you have one last step of multiplying that by 5, which if you multiply that by 5, that leaves you with the final answer of 17.5 or 17.5. Remember, we need to label our answers, which is inches squared. Alrighty, we're going to do 2 more problems. Now this next one I want to do with you so that you don't forget that yes, just like previous problems, there will be some times where you are given a decimal, and that's okay. We're going to solve it the same exact way. So again, the first thing you need to do is identify. So we're going to identify what our bases are, and if we're looking at our shape, which ones are your bases? If you said 6 and 7.9 or 7 and 9/10, you're correct, which means that this 3 right here is going to be your height. It's the one that's connecting those. So let's go ahead and start filling in our formula. We have 1/2, and our bases are 6 and 7 and 9/10, and our height is 3. Which step should we do first? If you said add, you are correct. So when we add 6 plus 7.9, what do you get? If you got 13.9 or 13 and 9/10, you are correct. The next step would be to multiply. If you don't like fractions, remember that you can change 1/2. What can you change 1/2 to? Yes, 0.5. So what is 0.5 or 1/2 times 13.9? If you got 6.95, you were correct. And then the last step is to multiply by our height, which was 3. So what would your final answer be? Awesome. Your final answer should have been 20.85 or 85 hundredths. And remember, we need a label, so we have inches squared. All right, and we're going to move on to the last example, which you are going to do next. So go ahead and solve for the area of this trapezoid. I've given you the formula as a reminder. All right, the first thing is identifying. We have our bases, which are 3 and 4.5, and then we have our height, which is 5. So if we start filling out that formula, it should have looked like this. And our height was 5. And the very first step you should have done is added your two bases. So 3 plus 4.5 or 3 plus 4.5 should have given you 7.5, 7.5. And then the next step would be to cut that in half and then multiply by our height. And when you cut 7.5 in half, or you multiply it by half, it should have given you 3.75. and then we needed to multiply that times 5, which would give you a final answer of 18 7/75. The decimal goes right there, and remember, we need to make sure we label it, which is inches squared, and that would be our final answer. All right, if you need help, remember to come back to this video. We have done 5 examples together so that you're able to practice this and do this well on your own. Have a good day, ladies and gentlemen.